They say just a few days after a tender worth over 500 million rand made payment to a company linked to billionaire Robert Gumede in 2020, over 4 million rand was allegedly paid to buy a Lamborghini. And additional funds were used for another car, a Porsche, to get a performance exhaust system installed for over 260,000 rand. They say the company also allegedly made large payments from the tender money to companies linked to the billionaire. The SIU alleges that a sum of 31 million rand was paid to Gijima AST Finance, 44 million rand was paid to Guma Railway Solutions, 16 million rand was paid to Guma Capital, just over 2 million rand was paid to Guma Group and Guma Africa Consulting. Another large sum of 58 million rand was paid to Four Rivers Trading 21. And the biggest chunk of the money was allegedly made to a law firm, Nicqui Galaktiou Inc, and the amount was over 152 million rand. And this is according to court documents which are filed by the SIU at the Special Tribunal court. And in this application, the SIU wants Red Roses Africa, a company owned by Robert Gumede's nephew Blessing Qwabe, to pay back the money.
This is an ANC event. Robert is a product of the African National Congress. And if it was not of the ANC, Robert was not going to be a billionaire. This is the type of work we do as the ANC. We produce millionaires and billionaires who are African. That's why we must support black economic empowerment. For the first time after 1994, Comrade Matthew we sit in a wedding like this, celebrating an achievement of an African child. In the past, it belonged to certain people. Today and many years to come, it will belong to people. Because we know who constitutes the people of South Africa. And Robert Gumede is one of those.
Welcome to True Crime with me, Julia. On this channel, we look into true crime cases that have happened in South Africa. Today's case is still before the Special Tribunal Court and also at the High Court in Durban. So please note that the story is based on filed court documents and on media reports, especially an exclusive investigation article by Amabungan. So again, the story is based on allegations at this point, and all individuals mentioned deny any wrongdoing, and the matters are currently before court and remain unproven.
Well, I always say in life, never let money define who you are, but use money to define a better tomorrow for yourself and for other people.
Most of us know businessman Robert Gumede. And if you don't know him, you probably know this mega mansion in Mpumalanga. It trends especially for its beauty on social media every now and then. And if you don't know Robert Gumede, you probably know his son Simphiwe Gumede. And if you don't know Simphiwe, you probably know this song by award-winning rapper AKA, who is also known as the boy who was so wealthy back in high school that his classmates like AKA wanted to come back in the next life as him, Simphiwe's cousin, or Robert Gumede's nephew Blessing Qwabe. But before we do that, you're probably wondering, how did we even get here? Why are we introducing Robert Gumede's family tree? And why are we talking about super wealthy people whose tax bracket is something we only read about on Forbes magazine? Well, in the past few days, Robert Gumede has been trending. He has been making headlines, and this is because he is one of the business people who reportedly wants to rescue embattled sugar producing company Tongaat Hulett. And I'm sure at one point, we all bought a Hulett's sugar products in our homes. So now how is Tongaat Hulett even needing to be rescued by Robert Gumede in the first place? This company was at one point super successful, an industry leader. Well, meet the group of executives that allegedly defrauded the billion rand JSE listed company and allegedly left it bankrupt. On a normal day, this group meets in boardrooms. They are executives at Tongaat Hulett, but today they're all in court charged with allegedly defrauding the company over 2.3 billion rand. So let's backtrack all the way back. Tongaat Hulett was formed in 1962. But its roots stretch back to the 1800s. It was built from two sugar giants, Tongaat Sugar Company and Hulett and Sons. The two companies merged and they created Tongaat Hulett, a sugar-producing giant based in KwaZulu-Natal. The company was a powerhouse. It employed thousands of people, and over the years, it became a JSE-listed company. The company stretched across Africa, producing sugar, property, and billions in revenue. For decades, it looked unstoppable. But behind the scenes, things were not as sweet. As the company expanded, so did its debt. Billions were borrowed to fund growth, but profits were not keeping up. Still, on paper, everything looked fine, maybe even too good. Then in 2019, the truth exploded. Tongaat admitted it had inflated its profits for years by billions of rands. So what was actually recorded on paper was not matching the money that was in the company's bank account. So in short, Tongaat Hulett was long indebted, and the executives allegedly did not reveal this in honesty. And then suddenly, the sugar company that investors trusted began to crumble. The share price crashed, confidence vanished, and the same company that once dominated the industry is now fighting to survive. In 2022, it entered business rescue, a clear sign that it could no longer pay its debts. From a giant of the sugar industry to a cautionary tale, Tongaat Hulett didn't just fall because of the market. It fell because the numbers it built its empire on were not real. And central to this was allegedly the people hired by the company. And these are the executives who are now facing a criminal case for this. They are the company's then CEO, Peter Staude, the CFO, Murray Monroe, other executives Michael Dayton, Rory Wilkinson, Kamla Sagri Singh, Samantha Schuler, and Gavin Kruger. Gavin was a registered auditor and engagement partner at Deloitte and Touch, and he is also charged with contravention of the Auditing Professions Act. They are all charged for allegedly cooking books, and they face charges of fraud amounting to approximately 3 billion rand. They also face charges of contravention of the Financial Markets Act, Companies Act, and Prevention of Organized Crime Act. It is alleged that between March 2015 and September 2018, the executives acted in common purpose to misrepresent to the company owners, its employees, creditors, shareholders, and others that the revenue that was derived from land sales was the correct value, correctly reflected in the financial reports, when in fact they had allegedly backdated sale agreements. And how they benefited is that because the company looked like it was making so much money, they allegedly received huge bonuses. So the executives were arrested in February 2022, and they are currently out on bail of 30,000 rand each, and the case is currently ongoing. But in the meantime, Tongaat Hulett is facing serious issues. Remember I had said Tongaat Hulett employed thousands of people? Well, it is one of the largest employers in KwaZulu-Natal and a major employer in the sugar industry. So people's livelihoods are at stake here. So naturally, government intervened to save jobs. Tongaat Hulett entered business rescue in 2022. A plan was approved to save the company, and the plan was led by a company known as Vision Sugar Consortium. But in early 2026, that plan failed as negotiations were not entirely agreed upon by involved parties, which included the banks that Tongaat Hulett owes, representatives from government through the IDC, and other parties who are negotiating to rescue Tongaat Hulett. Funding fell through. Deadlines expired, and rescue practitioners moved to liquidate the company. Now Tongaat Hulett hangs in the balance as government fights to stop its collapse and protect thousands of jobs. And this is where the name of billionaire Robert Gumede enters the chat. According to reports, he is linked to Vision Sugar Consortium, the same company that is in the negotiations to rescue Tongaat Hulett.
The company is Silo. Sozu, sikwazi ukuba part and parcel of the shareholding. Njengoba ngishilo ukuthi ngaphandle kwabantu bakho, ngaphandle komhlaba wakho, ngaphandle kwabasebenzi bakho, ngaphandle kwabalimi, ama-factory aonishwa yimi nomoya, they mean nothing. You know, so that is our commitment. Futhi sifuna ukuthi nasishintshe le company. Sifuna ukwenza ugesi. Kwamanje siyakwazi ukwenza ugesi orana ama-factory la. Sifuna ukwazi ukuthi sikudayise ugesi to Eskom. Okwesibili sifuna ukugenerate i-ethanol for i-fuel yemoto. Siyenze out of sugar. Kusho ukuthi nasifuna umhlaba wakho ndabezithi unikezwe abantu bakwazi ukutshala, sokwazi ukuthola umoba more, create ama-jobs so that sokwazi ukuthi na senze ushukela akukho esikulahla, senze ushukela, siphinde ugesi, siphinde futhi senze i-ethanol.
And the reason why his name is making headlines is because even though he has reportedly entered this intense race to rescue Tongaat Hulett, according to the SIU, Robert Gumede needs to mobilize his finances to try help pay back over 500 million rand, which was paid to his nephew's company Red Roses Africa in 2020 at the height of COVID, which he allegedly benefited from. In our previous report on the story of businessman Hamilton Klove, lawyer in Abatimbo Royal Bonanele Mgudlwa, and his ex and business partner Katleho O'Hara Mokonyan, we covered how businesses made a killing during the height of COVID by supplying PPEs to government and being awarded multi-million rand tenders. At the time, COVID-19 was at its worst, and millions of people were dying all over the world from this. Now, according to the SIU, Robert Gumede, through his nephew Blessing's company, also benefited millions of rands during that fragile time in our country. And let's start by meeting Blessing. He is not a known businessman. If anything, Blessing was very low-key before he got the tender. And according to a report by Ama Bongan, Blessing started flaunting his wealth on social media after receiving the tender. And the SIU suggests that Blessing was just a front, and he owned his company on paper. And the man pulling the strings and making sure that he lands his tender is Robert Gumede. And this is how they say he did it.
My fellow South Africans, it is a week since we declared the coronavirus pandemic a national disaster and announced a package of extraordinary measures to combat this grave public health emergency. The response of South African people to this crisis has been remarkable. Millions of our people have understood the gravity.
The SIU says on March 25, 2022, 5 days after President Cyril Ramaphosa declared a national state of disaster, Robert wrote a letter on behalf of Red Roses Africa, the company owned by Blessing, and at the time, it was called Main Street 699. Robert wrote the letter to Molefe Fan. Molefe was then a senior official in the National Treasury, and Robert offered to supply PPE. The information was passed on to the subs, and Red Roses Africa began lobbying police management to place an emergency PPE order. The SIU claims that Robert told the subs that the PPE would be imported immediately from China and brought to South Africa on a specially chartered Airbus. But the SIU says there never was any Airbus that was ready and waiting or even readily available in China with the required PPE. Instead, it appears that Red Roses Africa was either lying or fraudulently misrepresenting the truth to the subs so as to induce the conclusion of an agent contract, or they were only going to look for the Airbus after the payment was made to them. However, Robert and Blessing dispute this, and they say the source of the PPE and how it would be transported are irrelevant to the terms of the contract. And the SIU says that instead of being imported from China, the hand sanitizer was sourced from local companies including Descam. Red Roses Africa was contracted to supply 90,000 25-litre containers of sanitizer and 2 million face masks. The SIU says Red Roses Africa paid 162 million rand to the companies that supplied it with the hand sanitizer and masks, which it then provided to the subs, allegedly making 390 million rand profit that the SIU says this is an unlawful overcharge. The unit says Red Roses Africa paid 1,150 for a 25-litre of hand sanitizer inclusive of VAT, but it sold the same to the subs for 5,400 rand, which is 78% above the unit cost, resulting in a 370% gross profit. Robert and Blessing do not dispute the amount they made from the PPE sales, but they say it was reasonable in all the circumstances. The SIU claims that Robert played a central role, a mastermind, noting that given the amount of money that flowed to Robert and to the persons and entities associated with him, they said there was nothing Blessing would have done without Robert's knowledge and concurrence. And in court documents filed in response by Robert's company, he says he did not unilaterally approach Treasury to offer to procure PPE, but reached out to address a necessary issue of assisting the South African Police Service with much needed PPE pursuant to a request for quotation. And this is despite the fact that the supplying company in question, which is Red Roses Africa, had not previously supplied or sold PPE items. Robert and Blessing also say their prices were reasonable. They say the arrangement with the Airbus from China fell through because of delays by the National Treasury and the subs in signing the contract, which is why they ended up sourcing the PPE locally. They also say there was nothing wrong with the flow of money once it hit their bank account, because they had already supplied the needed products, and as such, how Robert Gumede affiliated companies benefited from that money has nothing to do with the tender.
I'm feeling like my old self again. on being me.
Okay.
Well, I always say in life, never let money define who you are, but use money to define a better tomorrow for yourself and for other people.
So as mentioned, the case is currently before the Special Tribunal Court, and the criminal case for the 3.5 billion rand in Hulett Tongaat's case is still underway. We will see how that turns out in court. What are your thoughts on the story? Let's talk in the comments. Please stay safe. I will see you on the next one.